Present.
Thank you so much, Eloise. And next up, we have Catherine Allen.
Present.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Wonderful to see you. Next up, we have Clayton Cook. Okay. Russell Frisbee. Ami Grace Tardy.
Christina Tackett sitting in for Amy. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Christina. And next up, Dan Levinson. Erica Leetson.
Present.
Thank you so much.
Rhymes with the reindeer.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And then next up, I have Jay Schwartz. Erica Huff. Peter Strauss. Jonathan Weiner. Chin Yu. Okay, are there any members of the Committee on Regulation present at this time who did not hear their name called? Okay, so I will move on to the second roll call. This is for ACUS members who are not on this particular committee and any alternates of such members. And first up here, we start with our wonderful project consultant, Elisa Dishman.
I'm present.
Thank you so much. And next up, I have Melissa, alternate for the Department of Homeland Security, Melissa Bowder.
Yes, I'm here.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And Bill Funk.
I'm here. Thank you.
Wonderful, yes, thank you, Bill. And next up, Bruce Lundegren, alternate for Small Business Administration.
I'm here, thank you.
Thank you. And next up, Tim Mullins, alternate for Department of Transportation.
Yeah, present, thanks.
Wonderful, thank you. And I believe that is it for the alternates and ACUS members not on this particular committee. Are there any other folks who are in such positions who did not hear their name called who are on the call at this time? Wonderful, thank you so much. And with pleasure, I will turn it over to our chair of the Administrative Conference, Mr. Andy Foyce, for his opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. As the new chair of the Administrative Conference and on behalf of all of us, I'd like to welcome you to this first fall meeting of 2022 of the Committee on Regulation. It looks like we have a nice group here who'll be able to dive into this subject matter and recommendations today. It's a beautiful fall day here in Washington, at least, so it's it's a perfect day to lock ourselves in and work on this. So I am grateful to all of you. It's also, if any of you are historians, it's also the 60th anniversary of the first day of the Cuban Missile Crisis, which I am just old enough to actually remember my mother being very nervous. That was 60 years ago today. So welcome everyone. Thanks to all of you and to any members of the public who may be here for being here with us today to work on this. A special thank you to our consultant, Alicia Dishman, for an interesting and insightful report. I enjoyed reading it and look forward to your presentation. And another special thank you to our committee chair, Eloise Peskoff, and thank you for your service as chair, Professor. As I told Eloise yesterday, this is my first committee meeting as chairman. So I look forward to seeing how it's done from Chair Peskoff and from all of you. And just one last final thank you to the ACUS staff, including especially Alexandra Saibo, for all the work that she and they have done on this. So with that, I turn things over to your chairwoman.
Thanks so much. I'm so happy to be here. It's so great to see so many faces and names that I know and for those of you I don't know and whose faces and or names I'm seeing for the first time, I'm looking forward to working with you. My name is Eloise Pasikoff. I'm on the faculty at Georgetown Law, and I am in my second term as a public member of ACUS. I've been a chair and of an ad hoc committee previously, and I've been a member of the Committee on Administration and Management for my time on ACUS. So I'm really excited and delighted to be taking the reins here. I have a script of some sort of procedural things to read to you before we turn matters over to Elisa, our consultant. Alexandra, I did just want to double check with you though, because I think there are either some people who've come in or some names that I'm not sure got noted in your record, and I'm just not sure whether they fell into any category or if we should just move on now.
I think we're good to go ahead
Okay.
and lay the ground rules. I'm keeping notes
Perfect.
on the participants and in the chat.
Perfect. Okay, wonderful. Well, so I will now go and lay our ground rules then. Thanks for that. So only ACUS members, which includes government members, public members, senior fellows, liaison representatives, and special counsels, whether or not on the committee, and their designated alternatives have full speaking privileges. I'd like to ask everybody to keep your microphone on mute if you're not actually speaking. And let's try to use the hand raise feature when you want to contribute. So that's down under reactions on the bottom. If for some reason you're having trouble locating the hand raise feature, feel free to just say in the chat, in the sort of reply to all feature, speak, or I'd like to speak or something like that. But let's not use the chat for substantive conversations. If you can unmute yourself when I call on you, great, and then please remute yourself when you're done. If it's possible to use your webcam to facilitate conversations that we are all kind of present and together, that would be wonderful. With respect to attendees other than ACUS members and their alternates, participation requires the unanimous consent of the committee members, and time permitting, I will call on such attendees at appropriate points, assuming that committee members consent, and I will assume that committee members assent if they don't raise an objection. If any of the participants would like to speak at that time, please just again raise your hand or indicate in the chat if for some reason you're having trouble raising your hand. And I'll call on you and ask you to unmute yourself. And then again, everybody, let's just remember to keep on mute when we're done speaking. So only members of the regulation committee, including again, government members and their alternates, public members, senior fellows, liaison representatives, and special counsels have a vote. And so please don't vote unless you're a member of the committee, and Alexandra has a list of committee members if you are unsure. So those are the ground rules for our conversation. And at this point, I'd like to turn things over to Elisa to set some high-level conversation points for us before we open our discussion up.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. My name is Elisa Dishman. I'm an associate professor of law at Brigham Young University, and I do scholarly research in the area of settlements with federal agencies and with state enforcers. And so I was delighted to take on this project and report where it had significance to my research and more broadly and making these agreements publicly accessible. Federal agencies resolve the vast number of their enforcement proceedings through settlements, and these settlements can be high profile in terms of the dollar figures involved, high penalties and restitution, as well as significant changes required by business operations, corporate governance, and compliance practices. Settlements play an important part in the way agencies conduct their enforcement mission. They allow agencies to conserve resources by settling as opposed to engaging in ongoing adjudication and potential litigation. They allow more expeditious redress to be provided to consumers and members of the public who have been injured. They also, importantly, allow agencies to transmit information about how they interpret their enforcement authority, as well as their authority and the laws that they enforce and the regulations they enforce. And they can provide an important guide to regulated entities about best practices and actions that the agency may be expected to take in the future. It's public accessibility to settlements is also important to regulated entities, stakeholders, and the public. Primarily, people we interviewed talked about the importance of access to these agreements for purposes of government transparency, that the access to these settlements ensures that there are no backroom secret doors and political favoritism, and increase the public trust in federal agencies and their enforcement mission. They also talked about the importance of uniform application of the law, and that public availability of settlements ensures that like cases can be treated more alike by federal agencies. We talked about the importance of notice to consumers and to the public about frauds and scams, and whether restitution may be available, and how agencies are using public taxpayer dollars to address these issues and other enforcement missions. Despite the importance of settlements, there's no centralized database available for settlements across agencies like we may see in the rulemaking context with regulations.gov, or with litigation in federal district courts like we see with PACER. It has been proposed in Congress to create such a centralized database for agency settlements, but such legislative efforts have stalled. So as a result, we see these settlement agreements dispersed across agency websites, and the public needing to go to each individual agency website in order to get settlement information or access settlement agreements. And part of the inconsistency that we can find across agency websites is driven by the legal framework and disclosure requirements. So the Freedom of Information Act and other disclosure laws do not generally require that agencies proactively disclose their settlement agreements on the agency website. Rather, settlement agreements are available to the public generally by the FOIA request process. And that can create the opportunity for agencies to choose whether they want to put settlement agreements up on their website or not. And as part of my report, I have sampled several federal agencies and indeed saw significant variations across federal agencies in what information they've decided to proactively post on their websites, with some agencies being very fulsome in their disclosure of settlement agreements, some not disclosing any at all, and some disclosing other types of information about settlements like summaries of settlements agreements or press releases that discuss settlement agreements. So there's considerable variation among agencies in their disclosure practices. And I think one of the important parts of this report and the recommendations is to give agencies some uniform guidance as they're making choices about disclosure on their websites. Another thing the report found as a result of sampling agency websites was variation in the ability to navigate agency websites to get to settlement agreements. What type of website design and tools does the agency website have available for users of the website to easily navigate to settlement agreements? And again, I saw considerable variation with some agencies. Just it requires a few clicks, very easily accessible to a settlement agreement, with others much more difficult, requiring more specialized knowledge and time to be able to access these agreements. Another place where there was variation was the comprehensiveness of the information with respect to the settlement available on the website. So there are some agencies that disclose their settlement agreements, but they also write summaries of the settlement. They link the settlement to other related content or enforcement actions. They have blog postings. They have defined important terms or the process of enforcement with the agency. And other agencies kind of have a continuum of practices along those lines too. So that was another place where there was variation. Another, I think, important part of the report were the interviews we conducted with agency officials and stakeholders that discussed some of the policy considerations I've mentioned previously about the importance of accessing the public accessing settlement agreements. During those interviews, the most significant, I think, concern and predominant concern raised had to do with confidentiality of agreements and legal obligations with respect to confidentiality. I think the report kind of shaped the recommendations in a couple of important ways. I see the recommendations really kind of falling into two categories. The first one is factors that agencies can consider as they are making decisions about disclosing settlement agreements that really kind of weave in these conversations we've had in our interviews about policy considerations about transparency and access to information to comply with the law, and agency resources, confidentiality concerns, and facilitating dispute resolution. The other category of recommendations I see is kind of a how question, that once agencies have made kind of a threshold decision about the information to disclose, how can the information be in settlements be disclosed in a way that is easily accessible on their website through navigation tools, and also providing other explanatory information surrounding the settlement. So with that, I will turn the time back over to our chair, and I look forward to hearing your comments and discussion and answering questions where I can be helpful to the committee.
Thanks, Elisa. That's a really helpful summary of the report and framing the recommendations for our conversation now. So we usually start with the recommendations and sort of walk through the recommendations and do our substantive and kind of line editing of the recommendations, and then work our way back, possibly in a subsequent meeting, to work on the preamble. But before we dive right into discussing the recommendations themselves, I want to just open it up to see if people have general comments or questions for Elisa that might frame the conversation that follows. So we'll start with people in the room, and then I think, Alexandra, you're also prepared to summarize. We got a comment from one of our members who couldn't be here today, and I think Alexandra will summarize that. But let me first call on Bill using hand raise feature. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Very interesting. I had a question about the from your report, Eliza, about it says that there's you could reach enforcement matters by using a search engine in 19 of the 20 different agencies. But then later, settlements are only available in 15 of the 20. So I was a little confused about the difference between the 19 and the 15.
Yes, thank you for that question. So I also included, if I could get certain types of settlement information in the search engine. So if I could go to the search engine and get a summary of a settlement, it's not the actual physical settlement agreement signed as by the parties, but if the agency had provided a significant summary of the settlement, I said that there was like navigation to settlement information.
So if I could just follow up on that, in other words, so when you say settlement available 15 out of 20, that's the actual settlement document. There might be, I guess, in 4 more of them, there'd be a summary of the settlement or something. Yes,
that is correct, or nothing at all. Yeah. So, and what's I think interesting about the data, just I don't want to talk over you to follow up, is how many agencies of the settlements, how many agencies I sampled do provide actual settlement agreements. 15 out of 20 did.
Now, that was surprising to me. I thought it would be a much smaller number, and that sort of affects me in terms of the recommendations. That is, I mean, the people who aren't doing what we'd like them to do seem to be outliers.
Well, this is a relatively small sample of the universe of agencies. I think when we see an agency, for example, that doesn't put any settlements up on the website, which EEOC was an example, they had some very good kind of legal obligations as to why they could not put particular settlements between federal employees and federal agencies up on the website. So I think like in general, like there looks to be a move towards putting this information up, which I think is a very good thing in most circumstances. But I think we wanted to be thoughtful about the different contexts in which agencies may choose not to because of their kind of particular enforcement mission or their legal obligations for confidentiality.
Okay, thanks, Bill and Elisa, for following up. Are there other kind of high level questions or big picture observations or anything that we want to start with, that folks want to start with before we turn to the recommendations themselves? Okay, so seeing none, maybe Alexandra, I'll just ask you to summarize the comment that we got. And if you want to also talk about how we maybe incorporated it into what we're about to discuss, that would be great.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So we received a public comment in advance from government member David Grahn from the USDA. He was not able to attend today, but he's hoping to attend on the 28th. And to just briefly summarize his really thoughtful comment, he wanted to emphasize sort of the framing of the recommendation in terms of agencies providing more information to the public and regulated communities, sort of what tools agencies can use to better inform those folks, and looking at it from the perspective of output as in terms of what agencies can provide versus outcome was one of his main points. And he also made a point about how the rise in significance of the Congressional Review Act could implicate this as well. He mentioned that litigation has been filed in some cases, and on guidance and that sort of thing has been very much in the news lately. So hopefully that covers what he had to say, and we look forward to your consideration of his comments as well. And Chairwoman had wonderful suggestions as to how we could add a little bit to the recommendations to encapsulate his public comments. So you'll see those in track changes when we get into that process.
So thanks so much for that. And I am new to this committee, but I will note in the other committee, we did not call the wonderful Erin Nielsen Mr. Chairperson. So I think I'm totally happy to just be called Eloise. I did not think it was an ACUS style. If it is an ACUS style, please correct me. But I don't think we need to stand on formality here. So with gratitude, however, for the elevation I have received for the last few minutes, I'm maybe just going to say, feel free to call me Eloise. So with that, Alexandra, I think I'll turn it back to you to put the recommendations up on the screen, and we'll just begin walking through them one at a time. Great. Okay, so everybody can see what's up now? We're all good? Can I just get a couple of thumbs up?
Let me know if I need to increase the font size or anything. Okay,
great. Hearing nothing and seeing minor nods of agreement that everybody can see this okay. So let's start with the lines that are on this screen. So we suggested, as Jeremy noted, adding this, Jeremy noted in the comment bubble on the right, adding this kind of preliminary clause in response to the suggestions that Alexandra just explained. So I'll just take a minute for people to read this, and we'll then see if anybody wants to make a comment before we talk about the actual factors. Okay, so if people want to comment on any aspect of lines 49 through 55, could I ask you to raise your hand? Oh, okay, Bill, back to you. Could you unmute? Bill, could you unmute yourself?
Thank you. We have the comment that was in the margin about whether the committee should address circumstances where there's multiple agencies.
Oh, right. Sorry. I had thought that Jeremy, I had read that too quickly. I had thought that Jeremy's comment was for part of the red line there. Okay, so actually, maybe let's start with the red line and then we'll go to Jeremy's comment. Bill, thank you for the clarification. So the red line was just an introduction responding to what Alexandra just read. I hear no comments or concerns about that. So, and I see none. So I will assume that 49 through 55, including the red line, are fine. And now we can turn to Jeremy's question. Okay, Bill, I think maybe your point is that Jeremy's question might unpack some of what you want to say.
No, I have a question or problem with the last sentence in this paragraph. But before we got there, I thought we should.
Got it. Okay, perfect. And thank you for flagging. I had somehow connected Jeremy's comment in my head to the red line. Okay, so Jeremy's comment is, Jeremy, you are here. Perhaps I should turn to you to articulate your comment.
Yeah, certainly there are instances of settlements in which multiple agencies are involved, often in different roles. I think an easy one is in a split enforcement regime where perhaps OSHA settles with a party in adjudication before a separate agency, the Occupational Safety and Health Review Commission. Would OSHRC or OSHA in that case make settlements publicly available? Doesn't matter for the sake of the recommendation. So that is the basic question.
Okay, so let's now turn to that discussion. So Bill, I don't know if your hand was up in part to respond to that.
Well, yes, I mean, would OSHRC ever be involved in the settlement? In other words, the settlement would be between OSHA and the private party. I mean, OSHRC's administrative law judge, I don't see how that would.
So OSHRC provides settlement judges. So they might be involved in the settlement in that way. And I don't know what OSHRC's practice is, but certainly at some agencies, the agency itself has to consent to it. I don't know if OSHRC, for example, issues consent decrees. But if the adjudicating agency had to consent to the settlement agreement, it might be involved in some way.
Yeah, I'm sure OSHA must be involved if it's a settlement agreement.
Indeed.
OSHRC is just a judge, but well, I just wondered if it was a big enough issue that happens often enough to justify even trying to deal with it, as opposed to letting whoever's involved with it deal with it. And I'd like to hear from Eliza, see what she says about that.
So yeah, I was thinking about this comment, and what I think a challenge is kind of the environment that we are in now. Like, each agency seems to be making decisions for itself. We don't have kind of a centralized process to gather. And in the absence of that, I think it's kind of hard to say, well, as between this agency and this agency, this one gets to choose. And my gut is here that each agency that would be involved in a multi-agency like enforcement settlement would choose for themselves whether to post it on their own website. But also interested in hearing other people's kind of reaction to this question of kind of the multi-enforcer issue.
Do any other folks want to weigh in on how to respond to this? Well, we don't have a ton of information in the report, right, about this kind of so it almost makes me a little reluctant to lean too heavily on it because we don't have a lot of information about it. Would it make sense to add to the factors that we're going to talk about in the next page, something about to the extent that multiple agencies are involved, the balance of equities, blah, 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 something like that? Jeremy, I'm not really sure exactly what the concern that you're trying to get at. I don't know that we have enough to sort of make a recommendation picking a lead agency or something like that.
Right. And that's fine. It was only to post to the committee whether we know this is not specific as to if multiple agencies are party to an agreement or adjudicating a case in which a party is an agency is a party to a case, whether this recommendation should actually address that issue. I'm agnostic on the point. This is merely to flag it for the committee.
I'm not on the committee, but I mean, my suggestion is if this is an issue only with split enforcement agencies, then that should be made explicit. If it's broader than that, then I guess just leave the language broader.
Yeah, I mean, the only other circumstance I could think of where it comes in is agencies that regulate other agencies. So, an MSPB proceeding, for example, an agency is a party to that case. If I were looking for a settlement agreement, would I look at the MSPB's website? Would I look at the agency that's involved in litigation's website? So that's how I think it would come in. But I don't know if there's a clean way to address that in the recommendation. I merely pose it to the committee.
So again, because I don't think we have a ton of background research on those particular questions in the report, I am hesitant to suggest dealing with it in a fulsome way here. I'm willing to be corrected or rebutted on that point. And so welcome views from other folks. I don't see any hands raised. I'm sort of scrolling through people. Does anybody else want to weigh in on this? Bill, is this relevant to your comment on the last sentence, or you just wanted to make sure that we discussed it before you raised that point?
It's just, I want to make sure we discussed it.
Okay, thank you. So I think unless I hear some strong push from committee members to add dealing with this multiple committee question, multiple agency question. I am reluctant, I think, to add it unless, Jeremy, you have sort of a wordsmithing way you want to put it on the table for consideration.
Nope, truly agnostic, just flag.
Okay, okay, all right. So I think in the absence of kind of deep background on it, I think we should sidestep the complexity now, especially because we don't have a sense of how many agencies it involves and so on. So okay, so thank you for raising the issue. Bill, why don't we go to you then and talk about the last sentence of this?
It will spill over to the recommendations, the following recommendations as well. But both the last sentence here and all the following parts of it refer to settlements generally. And I thought it would be better to say, we go back to the prior page if we can, okay. To say in determining whether to post a settlement agreement on its website, an agency should consider factors including, all right? Because it seems to me that different settlement agreements, even within the same agency, will have different considerations. And so in deciding whether to post, it makes it sound here like it's a generic, all right? Whether we're going to post anything at all, we're going to look at all these things. And I wanted to say, well, in deciding whether to post a particular one, you should consider this. Now, maybe in deciding whether to post a particular one, you also decide generically, we're not going to do any. But I wanted to at least sort of make it sound like you're breaking out and looking at each settlement agreement in light of these factors as to whether to what extent you would put it up.
So what do people think about that? I mean, I think the converse could also be true, Bill, right? That in deciding whether to post a particular settlement agreement on your website, you are making a generic category, you know, that items like this should go up. What do people think? Any comments in support?
Let me just sort of hold this for the time being,
Okay.
and then see how it plays out as we go through these following things.
Oh, and Erica, I see you have a hand raised. Thanks for that.
Sorry, I tried to push it and it was kind of slow to,
Yeah.
Zoom was slow to respond. I guess I see the value in signaling a case-by-case assessment, but I had actually read number 1 as guidance about developing a policy on settlement posting. And I don't know if we ought to be talking about that in addition to case-by-case assessments, but I had read number 1 differently, and I don't know how others feel about that, or if, Bill, you think it just makes sense to go straight to deciding case-by-case.
Bill?
If you want me, I mean, I thought the same thing, that there should be, the agency should have a policy, but the policy would be to consider each settlement in light of the factors as described in this policy.
Okay.
And I mean, it's just, when you get, I mean, on the next page, when we just talk about whether settlement agreements regularly attract public interest, the answer might be, well, some do, some don't. And in making our general policy, we should say those that the public would be interested in, we should make public, and those that we don't, and that would be, but would be thinking of that in terms of each individual settlement agreement, rather than making a generic determination. We're not going to do any because a lot of them don't raise a question.
Okay, thanks for that. Catherine?
Sorry. I just wanted to point out that if you go up the last paragraph above the recommendation, it says this recommendation encourages agencies to develop policies that recognize the benefits of blah, 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 blah. So I guess I had also read this as talking about how to develop your policy rather than talking about how to determine kind of within that policy, like where a specific case fits. But I just wanted to point out it's line 38.
Yeah,
says that.
That's helpful. It's helpful to have the framing of the preamble, although of course we're going to go back and revise the preamble after. So, you know, if we decide to change the recommendations, we can go back and fix that. So one suggestion for just moving forward now is, why don't we hold in the track changes Bill's comment, go through the factors, and then I think maybe even let's consider after this whether part 1, recommendation 1, should be the policies, and then maybe we insert a new recommendation that says something about evaluating case by case on the basis of the policy development or something like that. Let's circle back to that after we work through the policies, or the factors rather, on the next page. So I'm prepared to do that unless anybody wants to hold further on this conversation right now. I'm looking for hands. Erica, is your hand going back up? Yeah. Can you unmute?
Trying to, I'm having
No.
issues with my computer. I agree that it makes sense to wait, but I also think that as we read through these, I mean, just as Bill said, whether settlements regularly attract public interest, he commented, I'm putting words in your mouth, Bill, I'm sorry, but you know, it might depend, right? Some will, some won't. I feel like as we go through these factors, we may need to know whether we're talking about the policy, the shaping of the policy, or the individual case by case determination. Let's try, by all means, let's try to delay that decision, but I have a feeling
Okay.
it'll affect how we
So
talk.
that's fair. But so my sense is that it probably makes sense to be recommending that agencies develop a policy or series of policies, and then also acknowledge that individual case by case agreements may have to be assessed, you know, individually, to say the same thing twice in both halves of my sentence. So I wonder if we should figure out a way to proceed developing the policy with the idea that we may really have to allow agencies to make case by case considerations after they have figured out what the policy is. So it may be that we just want to make clear to ourselves right now that we're going to discuss this as though we're recommending that agencies develop policies.
Okay.
Bill's comment is making me think that we may want to allow for the idea of policies based on categories, right? So certain categories might fall into one or the other. You might need different policies for different categories. I'm not really sure. I'm sort of agnostic on that, but I'm wondering. But Bill, maybe I'll turn to you since your hand is up again before we move on.
Well, I wanted to say that I certainly agree that what we want is that agencies to develop a policy. But I think the policy should be to identify which settlement agreements should be made public and to what extent they should be made public. And so in making that, as you said, maybe categories, all right? So for example, in the A that we're looking at here, whether proactive disclosure of settlement agreements would help members of the public. Well, we've already said in the report and in the preamble here, we think that proactive disclosure of settlement agreement does help members of the public. And so what we really need here is whether proactive disclosure of particular settlement agreements would help members of the public. Right, rather than a generic, do settlement agreements generally help members of? Yes, they do. You know, so say whether proactive disclosure of settlement of particular
kinds of this
Yeah.
kind of settlement agreement. I mean, would that, if we insert that kind of language into this recommendation and maybe thereafter, would that help address some of this type or particular kinds of settlement agreements?
Yeah.
Okay, Erica.
I want to suggest that it might make sense to take that first thing that Bill said, that agencies should develop policies about whether and when, and that might be where we start, and that we might actually build in this concept that you've just introduced, that they might want to consider developing policies that are categorical, that proceed categorically, but then in addition, following Bill's suggestion, you may want to consider making case by case decisions and then the list. So in other words, just make this all clear.
Yeah.
They should have these policies, they may want to be categorical or not, and then they ought to be making decisions on an agreement by agreement basis.
So then combining Bill's and Erica's suggestions, it may be that in line 54, after the word initiated, we just want to hit hard return and have indeterminate, and then keep Bill's proposed language there in determining whether to post a settlement agreement on its website agencies should consider the following, and then we could build in language in lines 49, 50, 51 that brought that particular type or categories language in.
And Bill's initial point about, the recommendation is actually that they ought to be developing policies about whether and which.
So it's not just that agencies should consider posting, but that agencies should develop policies addressing when settlement agreements of different categories will be posted on their websites. That has to be, massaged. But does that capture, Bill, does that capture the thrust of your suggestion?
Yeah, I don't think you need to say different categories. I think all you need is to develop policies addressing when settlement agreements should be posted on their websites. And then we go down and talk about which kinds of settlements should do what.
Okay, great. So let's take a minute now and look at new number 1 and then the first sentence of new number 2 and see whether people feel that this captures or has anything else to say. So actually, Alexandra, I think are you moving that language? Because I think we need that, we need to keep that description of what we're talking, what kinds of settlement agreements. Here we go. Okay. Okay, I think there's too many clauses going on here to follow. Does anybody have a suggestion for how to break up the sentence more?
If anything, the hyphen before including should probably just be a comma.
Yeah. Okay. At least that makes it easier to read. Thank you for that.
We might just put what's in the between the hyphens or dashes as a footnote to describe what administrative enforcement proceedings we're talking about in this.
Yeah.
whole
Committee of,
document.
I don't know if this is an ACUS style question or a committee of style question, but do we have footnotes in the recommendations themselves? I usually think of
There's no rule against it, but there is a strong practice against it. And
Okay.
I guarantee if it's in there, somebody at the assembly will say, we don't do that at ACUS. So
it might
would
make
be
more
worried
sense to
about
put it
that.
as a second sentence.
Yeah.
By blah, 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 comma, we mean.
You could actually start with that sentence.
Peter?
Hi, you could actually start with that sentence. Administrative enforcement proceedings are proceedings in which a civil penalty or other coercive remedy is sought against a person for violating the law, so forth and so on, ending at period after initiated. And then as part of their portfolio and so forth.
Great. Okay, so let's take a minute to look at this.
Administrative enforcement proceedings are proceedings in which. No dash.
And then I think the clause, including agreements reached before administrative proceedings are formally initiated, needs to go at the end of the next sentence. That's referring to the agreements themselves, not the proceedings.
Yes.
Okay, so Alexandra, are you done cutting and pasting? This looks like sentences that we can look at.
Sorry, yes, that was an affirmative.
Okay,
Hopefully,
yeah,
hopefully it's cleaned up.
okay. So I think this captures the thrust of what we were talking about before. Does anybody have any comment on it? Okay, seeing none, let's move then.
Well,
Okay, sorry, yes. So Peter,
Do we-
I'll recognize you, and then Catherine, I see you.
do we mean to limit it to settlement agreements that are? No, never mind. I'll back away.
Okay, all right, Catherine?
I guess my inclination would be to have, since this is the recommendation, to have the first sentence be the actual recommendation. I guess I just wondered if we could say something like agencies should develop policies addressing when settlement, or when, more like what it was before, like when settlement agreements of administrative enforcement proceedings should be posted on their websites, period. Administrative enforcement proceedings are blah, 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 blah. You know, something, I don't know, that would be my inclination, would be just
Okay,
the
so
first
move the
sentence should
first
be-
sentence to the second part. Again, ACUS question. So Jeremy, I'll look at you, although anybody, I guess. If something is defined in the preamble, do we typically define it again in the recommendation if it's core to the recommendation?
Typically, yes.
Okay.
The purpose being that the recommendations can stand alone.
Yeah, okay. All right. I do think it might be ACUS style to start with the recommendation. I remember many conversations about agencies should, or agencies should consider, or whatever. So I think maybe, unless I hear strong objection, we'll keep the definitional sentence after the first recommendation. Okay. Hearing nothing. Peter, do you have something to voice or no? Okay.
In the first sentence, I suppose instead of adjudicative, the word should be enforcement.
Great. Okay, thanks for that. So I think we might be ready to now talk about the factors, including Bill's comments on the subsequent page about a settlement agreement. So let's move there unless anybody has an objection. Okay, so now let's talk through seeing no objection, let's talk through the factors. So now can we discuss the factors as though we are talking about an individual settlement agreement, or do people still want to find ways to make this the categorical conversation? Bill, I'll turn to you because it was your suggestion to make this individual. Do you think that there's some sort of disjunction between starting with the policy and then turning to an individual, or are you comfortable with the way this is reading now?
Well, I think I'd want to amend it a little bit by saying in determining which settlement agreements they should post on their website. To post, right? And then if we have its website, then we should have agency. An agency should consider.
Okay, so let's start with that. Let's hold that as our leading introductory sentence for now. And let's talk through the factors substantively, and then we can work our way back to this lead-in sentence and just confirm that it still makes sense. So let's talk about A, whether proactive disclosure.
So isn't it the case that with that lead-in, you no longer need of particular settlement agreements, paragraph after paragraph?
Can you scroll back up to the sentence, Alexandra, just so that we can see that? In determining which settlements. Yeah.
But whether proactive disclosure would help, whether proactive
Exactly.
disclosure would promote.
So we don't even need of settlement agreements anymore. Is that what you're saying? We can delete.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so that's language that Alexandra will work through and see what it looks like when we've cut it. I think you still need to do it for C, Alexandra. Can we talk about the substance of factor A? We had a comment a few minutes ago that maybe this was duplicative because we've already said that it's valuable. So I'm going to confess that I made a comment earlier in the week on a draft version of this, that the factors to consider all seemed very heavily slanted against disclosure to me. And so I said that my read was that since the thrust of the recommendation is actually in favor of disclosure, that some of the factors ought to be leading to kind of an easy yes, rather than oh, this is a hard question, let's err in favor of not disclosing. So I think it's sort of because I had suggested that we want some easy yeses that we have some of these first few. So I'm going to ask for people's reaction on that. Peter, I see your hand is up, and I'll remind everybody else that I'm happy to call on you if you want to be recognized. But Peter, I see you.
Okay, so one, I agree with your instinct entirely. Two, you started out by saying, well, we've already said X, but I don't recall that we have already said X in the recommendations. So I think this is really a good place to start. That is, we haven't already said that what we're trying to do is to help the public understand. It isn't
right. That's language that came from the preamble. Right. What I meant is that in this discussion, in the previous, in what's now recommendation number 1, we were sort of saying agencies should develop policies on that. But you're right, we haven't fully said this.
What's in the recommendation needs to be in the recommendation. But
right.
This preamble doesn't matter.
Right. Okay, so with that lead in, other comments on the substance of factor A? Okay, shall we turn to factor B? Catherine?
Sorry, I was just wondering, does members of the public include all regulated entities? Because I guess members of the public makes me think of people, but a lot of the entities being regulated are corporations. So
yeah, I actually think elsewhere we talk about regulated communities. I'm not sure we've gotten to it yet. I can't remember exactly where we are in this, but I think in some places we might talk about regulated communities and members of the public, and we definitely don't want to only have members of the public if elsewhere we say it. Erica?
I think in at least this one, it should not be agencies exercise their enforcement authority and interpret the laws and regulations they enforce, because the introductory language is referring to a single agency.
Actually, that's generally the case.
Indeed.
How the agency exercises.
Yeah. And then it enforces. And then I think we'll have to make that change wherever it goes on. Okay, and Alexandra, I saw you typed in regulated entities. Is that paralleling language that we have elsewhere? I just want to make sure we're consistent in how we talk about the
yes. So we have in subparagraph C, entities regulated by the agency. Did we want to change that to regulated entities or use entities regulated by the agency? I think is the choice.
I'm curious what others say. My own instinct is that entities regulated by the agency is probably more what we mean. Because most agencies, I mean, many entities are regulated, but we mean by the agency. So, Melissa?
Sorry, my computer didn't want to unmute. I was just thinking when we were discussing the need for the recommendations to stand on their own, that it may be worth considering whether, where is it now? I think factor B about the promotion of accountability and transparency and sort of the public benefit, if that needs to be reframed somehow, that like rather than saying that the agencies should consider whether it will promote accountability, like it could be should consider that disclosure generally promotes accountability or something along those lines. I know it gets rid of the parallelism, but it would help bring that point back to the recommendations from the preamble.
Okay, so Peter, I'll call on you in just a sec. Unless you're going to be talking about this particular thing. this?
I think so.
Okay, all right, then I'll call on you now and then we'll figure out how to work with this.
Would help those the agency regulates and the public understand legal obligations. The public doesn't have legal obligations, so that there is not. And if we want to focus on those the agency regulates, let's just say it. Those the agency regulates and the public.
Okay,
No members of, just the public.
okay, Peter, did you have a thought on Melissa's comment on factor B?
Well, I think the factor B is the same. By allowing, and you could not have to repeat the formula again and again by simply making it, I suppose, passive, or by allowing the evaluation of how it enforces the law and uses.
Okay, so let's try that. Alexander, if you could capture that. Melissa, can you help propose some language that captures the particular, maybe let's wait actually for Alexandra to type what she's typing.
By allowing the evaluation of how the agency enforces the law.
I think
No, not there. It's in B. It's in B. It's in B. It's not
she's
there.
moving there, Peter. She's moving there. She was just deleting where the
Right.
language that she had.
Doesn't B just repeat what's in A?
So I can
Well-
clarify what the intent here, and maybe Elisa can jump in as well. These are separate points in the report. One is that those who are regulated by the agency can understand what they can and cannot do. The second is more of a public accountability thing, that the members of the public, regulatory beneficiaries, can assess overall agency performance.
But the regulated bodies also, by allowing the evaluation of how the agency enforces.
Right.
And uses.
But one of them is individual entities. What can they or cannot, what are their rights and obligations? And B is assessing overall agency performance, not necessarily individual rights and obligations.
Right.
Those do strike me as two separate points. So Melissa, let's go to you, back to you to see if you have a particular phrase that you want to translate to be to I think you were talking about putting a thumb on the scale a little bit more.
I was flagging for the group, right, that it sounded like, to the extent that the preamble discussion and the discussion we've had so far is that the base sort of assumption and acknowledgement is that as a general matter, absent sort of particular issues or some sort of specific nuance like EEOC, the expectation is that releasing the settlement agreement is in the public sort of like benefit for whatever reason, both A and B. And that given that context, if we are now reviewing this with an eye to the fact that the recommendations would need to stand on their own, I didn't know if
Sure.
the group thinks that A and B, really, I had first said just B, but whether any of these should be written in a way that sort of bakes in that as the default sort of way
So-
you would consider it. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. So I have a thought about how to respond to that, but Catherine, I'm not sure if you are also weighing in on this particular point or you've even a new point. Okay, so then I'll keep your hand up and I'll call on you in just a minute if you don't mind. But with respect to Melissa's point, what if we change all of the wethers to the extent to which? Because whether is sort of an on-off switch, and
Yes.
the extent to which actually
Yeah.
is sort of like holistically on balance. Okay, so I
No, I
see.
think that makes sense.
All right, so I heard a yes from Peter and I saw a nod from Bill. Does anybody else want to weigh in on the whether versus extent to which? Okay, so let's keep them like that for now, although as we keep moving, we're really only at A and B, and it may be that when we get to subsequent ones, we have to rethink whether we really mean extent to which, having just now imported it somewhat blindly. Catherine, let me turn to you. We're still talking really about just A and B.
Yeah, this was just about some of the changes we made. I've gotten a little confused. Someone was talking about the distinction between the points in A and B. And I guess I'm a little confused now how we have A reading, because if A is only supposed to be talking about the regulated entities, should we take out the words "and the public"?
We should take out the word "there."
So I think the point as A currently stands is that the public may also want to understand legal obligations, which is in A, and the public may also want to understand accountability concerns and whether the agency is doing its job. So they are two different points, in which case Peter's comment that changing there to just it's in, did you
Understand legal obligations.
understand? Yes, understand legal obligations. Catherine, does that clarify? Because both regulated entities and the public may want to understand the law and may also separately want to be in a position to hold the agency accountable.
You could also leave out that whole phrase and simply the public clarify how the agency, so forth and so on.
Sorry, Peter, I did not understand which phrase you're talking about leaving out.
In A, you could take out their legal obligations by clarifying and simply insert the word clarify.
So would help those the agency regulates and the public understand how the
agency
exercises its info. Yeah, that captures it. Catherine?
Sorry, but just in B, one of the things that disclosure is doing is allowing the evaluation of how the agency enforces the law, which I think is the same as what we say in A, how the agency exercises its enforcement authority.
Were you trying to capture something else with enforces the law, like prioritizes or?
It's more like public oversight over enforcement activities. By like making these things public, it facilitates public oversight, whereas A is focused on the individuals understanding their rights and obligations.
Is enforces the law what you really mean, or is it sort of uses its authority?
How well the agency enforces the law, I think, is what we're getting at here. It's more a.
That would be, Jeremy, would that be clearer if interprets the law and regulations it enforces preceded and exercises its enforcement authority? Yeah, because if that's where the focus is.
Yeah.
But I think that's on something different, because Jeremy, that I have no objection, Peter, to that recommendation, but I don't think that responds necessarily to what Jeremy was saying, which is that the first one is still about understanding the law and how the agency uses the law, and the second one is still about understanding.
I agree with that.
Okay.
And because the first one is about understanding the law,
Great.
the understanding the law phrase should come first.
Great. Okay, so we're still working on resolving the issue that Catherine has raised, though, which is that in B, enforces the law still doesn't quite capture the distinction between A and B. So Jeremy, do you have another? I know you just offered something and I've lost it because we're
getting at the idea of allowing the agency to essentially oversee how well the agency is actually enforcing the law, how well it's exercising its delegated authority to enforce the law. So it's more like, how many cases is it bringing every year? Is it actually detecting all cases of violations? It's more of a systemic issue.
So how about something like such as by allowing the evaluation of the agency's enforcement work and use of public funds?
That's it.
Catherine, does that capture the concern that, or does that respond to the concern you raised by distinguishing it enough?
I'm not sure. I'm still thinking about it. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. I'm going to scroll through. I'm looking at just other folks who are on the call to just see if anybody else wants to raise a hand or comment. I'm just welcoming views. So I will not put anybody on the spot. There's no cold calling here, although it is taking lots of effort for this professor not to do that. But I won't. Different hat. I think let's Catherine, do you want another minute or are you? I think this is capturing sort of the distinction we're trying to get at between A and B.
Yeah, is there something missing in the sentence though?
The extent to which proactive disclosure would promote accountability and transparency, such as by allowing the evaluation of the agency's enforcement work and uses of.
Uses,
public
sorry, I
funds.
didn't see the uses. Okay.
Oh, no, maybe it was not uses of, but uses. One was a verb and one is a noun. Of the
Oh,
agency
but the of is right.
enforcement work.
That
And
fixes it.
yeah, okay. Okay, so I'm gonna move on to C unless I see a hand or hear a comment / objection. Okay, Peter.
If this is not about particular folk, but about in general, it could end at the first, after the first word on the second line.
Sorry, are we talking about C now, Peter?
Yes, the extent to which settlement agreements regularly attract public interest or regularly attract interest, period.
Because we don't need, could you just say?
We don't need who we're talking about.
We don't need all the examples.
No.
Okay, does a drafter want to? Does a drafter have any comments to that? Were you trying to get at something with the examples that is necessary? Jeremy?
Maybe the extent to
Perhaps not.
which it's settlement agreements.
Yeah.
Okay, Jeremy?
I think it was only to flag that there may be interest from lots of quarters in settlement agreements as opposed to, say, just regulated entities or just the media. That was the only intent, but that may not be necessary to spell out.
Okay, Bill?
Well, again, it's this question of whether, I'd say the extent to which a settlement agreement regularly attracts
Great.
public interest.
I
Because
would not.
because we introduced it by which, and so rather than saying whether generic, all of our settlement agreements do this or not, no, it's which ones. And
Can we
in
go-
doing that, we say whether a settlement agreement regularly tracks, then that would be in that category would be subject to disclosure.
Okay, Peter, I'll call on you in 1 minute, but first I am trying to get in my head, Bill, your comment, but I can't do it unless I see A and B.
In
Because
the introduction. Yeah, in determining which
Yeah.
settlement agreements to post, an agency should consider factors including the extent to which a settlement agreement regularly attracts public interest.
So
And then that kind of, whether extent to which,
a kind of settlement agreement?
yeah, you could do
But
that.
how would they know whether, if it's just an individual settlement agreement, how would they know whether it attracts, whether it regularly attracts?
Good point.
Okay, so let's pause on that for a second and let me hear from Peter.
So if you wanted to do that, you could say the extent to which a settlement agreement is likely to attract public interest. If you're intending for them to think proactively. But I am attracted by the proposition that agencies whose settlement agreements regularly attract public interest should consider that as a factor in posting settlement agreements. So I wouldn't make the change.
Bill, is there any real difference, given what Peter has just said, to having the singular versus having the plural there?
The language that is presently on the screen looks fine to me.
Okay, can we hear from some other folks weighing in as between the singular and the plural here?
And it's not so much singular plural as much as all generally, or a type of settlement agreement, or whether it's a kind of, it's the idea of a category, but not to which settlement agreements generally speaking is likely to attract.
So do you feel?
I think Bill is addressing a kind of middle ground between this particular settlement agreement and certain types of settlement agreements.
So why don't we do
Um,
that? Why don't we put in the type of or kind of language? How does that sit with people? Bill?
Or one could say the extent to which particular settlement agreements are likely to attract.
That's not as good.
Okay, I'm happy with the typo.
Are there any objections to this language? Okay. So let's move to D. Erica,
Actually,
we're moving to D. Yeah.
no, you asked and my computer, I'm back still with the a type of, which I just don't understand that sentence as written. Because I mean, the lead in to this, if you scroll back up for a second, and maybe I'm being, in determining which settlement agreements to post, an agency should consider the extent to which that type, is that what we mean? That type?
Yes,
Okay, thank you. All right, now I understand it.
Yeah, that now reads with number 1. Okay, so I'm going to move to D, and although I'm also vaguely pausing to see if anybody has a computer delay hand that they want to stick up. But I think let's move to D, seeing none. So we're sort of turning to the negative here. The first ones being the sort of thumb on the scale in favor. Peter?
the likelihood that other parties would reach settlements and resolve. Because we're only talking about administrative enforcement proceedings. You don't need
Yeah.
those words.
And so that's designed to capture that what we really mean is not the parties to this particular process, but with whether if other parties know that things are going to be disclosed, whether it would keep them from settling.
Could be that other regulated interests rather than parties. No, just other regulated entities. You don't need that much.
Catherine?
For some reason, I found that would reduce the likelihood a little hard to follow. Would saying like deter, would that be too strong?
It doesn't sound too strong to me, and it does reduce wordiness. Do others disagree?
How about might deter rather than would deter?
Yeah,
Right.
that's
Yes.
even better.
Then it should be might deter other parties or other regulated entities from reaching.
Right, okay, it'll just take her a minute to catch up with all the typing. Alexandra, you're doing great. It is very hard to keep track of all of the floating around things.
And resolving.
So the extent to which proactive disclosure might deter other regulated entities from reaching settlements and resolving disputes expeditiously. What do we think? Any further comment?
Why do we need proactive?
Do we have proactive in the other recommendations? Can you scroll up?
I think the idea here is that if FOIA requires an agency to disclose a settlement agreement, it can't get around that, but it might decide not to proactively disclose settlement agreements. It only disclose it if someone requests it.
But does FOIA require agencies to disclose settlement agreements? And does it, in any event, produce general public dissemination?
I will turn to Elisa, but I don't think that FOIA categorically speaks to settlement agreements, and unless it's covered by an exemption, I don't know how an agency would get out of disclosing it.
Well, there may be all kinds of confidential business information, for example.
Elisa, do you have a thought on this?
Yeah, so, you know, so the agencies are not required under the proactive disclosure requirements to put them on their websites. And so I think what those recommendations are trying to capture is, when does an agency want to kind of go beyond its legal requirements and put settlements up on its website?
So what does the word proactive accomplish?
Yeah, I think that is trying to capture this idea that, you know, proactive is kind of part of the FOIA regime, and that if they're going to go beyond the legal requirements and do so, these are factors they can consider.
I don't know how that's different from just disclosure.
We could just use disclosure.
Proactive disclosure is disclosing without a request from a particular individual, whereas the eighth, like 552A3, refers to only disclosure when someone requests a particular record. That's the distinction.
I think
But
proactive,
let's look at the introductory sentence again.
yeah.
Determining which settlement agreements to post on its website, an
word
agency should
post.
consider the following.
The
Yes,
word
post.
post takes care of proactive. It's clearly
Exactly.
not talking about being responsive to FOIA requests here.
Yes, right,
And-
exactly.
I think we could also, can we go back to the now first recommendation? Because I wonder if proactive could do some work there, develop policies. Do you think post is doing the same word there, or do we need the word proactive as well? You think post is doing the same word? Post captures proactive is what you're saying.
Post captures proactive
It's
and,
not disclosing to an individual. Okay,
and as a matter of semantics, at least this person attaches in advance of idea, and that's certainly not what we mean. We want the settlement agreement to have been accomplished and then disclosed. So post is really quite enough.
okay. I am now convinced. I was not convinced in person. I am now convinced. Does anybody else want to weigh in before we delete proactive from A through everything else in these factors? Okay. So I think we're going to delete proactive, and we are now finished with D and are going to move to E. I'm also going to flag that I think at 2:30, so in 10 minutes, or depending on, maybe we can finish E and F, depending on where we are, but I think we should take a 5-minute break at the kind of halfway mark. So let's get through these, and then we'll take a 5-minute break. Is F the last one? Yeah, okay. So let's get through E and F, and then we'll take a 5-minute break. So E, the extent to which disclosure would adversely affect sensitive or legally protected interests involving, among other things, national security, law enforcement. Okay, Peter?
From a FOIA perspective, the extent to which suggests redaction. And I don't know whether we want to get into that or not. And whether there's any discussion of redaction of the settlement agreement to eliminate those sensitive things. I would think it would be sufficient to do whether disclosure would. Unless we want to address the sections 1 through 9 issues.
To make sure I understand you, Peter, is your specific recommendation, I understand the background, but is a specific recommendation that we delete the extent to which from this particular recommendation sub E?
And replace it with the word whether.
I forget actually at the moment, Jeremy or Alexandra or Elisa, do we have a redaction recommendation below? I think we do, right?
We
Like
do, recommendation 3.
Okay.
Or 4 now, or somewhere in there.
Okay.
There it is, 5 now.
So we're not talking about 5, but let's just look at it to inform our thinking about this sub E above.
So
redaction covered below. Peter, does that change, if we're gonna have a redaction recommendation separately, does that change your comments?
I would make a cross-reference to 5.
Okay, can we scroll back up then?
Or the extent to which disclosure would blah, 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 comma, minors, comma, in a manner unlikely to be cured by redaction in accordance with section 5 of these recommendations.
Okay, other thoughts on, let's actually stick with other thoughts on this particular fix. Do people have comments on this cross-referencing part? Okay, so let's stick with this cross-referencing unless somebody shoots up a hand. Can we talk about the individual items listed? Is anything missing? I do think we're missing an or an and in between privacy and minors. I think it should probably be or, yeah. Are we missing anything in that list? Is that the right list? Okay, anybody else have any comments on E at all? Okay, seeing none, let's move to F.
Why is the word record rather than freedom of information?
Drafter, do we have a? Is there a reason?
I mean, I suppose besides FOIA, there are other statutes that require access to records or, Privacy Act requests or something like that. So
By reducing the volume of requests for disclosure? Because it's not the record that's being requested.
Right. Or it's not the record, there's two meanings of the word record here. Yeah. Requests for disclosure probably captures it more specifically. Okay, other views on F? Okay, I see no hands. I see no nods. I'm scrolling through my screen here, looking for agreement or dis. Okay, and seeing none, I think we may be at agreement on this first set of factors. So just listening for anybody to put up a hand or objection, but okay, so let's take a 5-minute break. Let's come back a little after 2:30 and we'll work our way through as far as we get at that point. Okay, I'm just looking for cameras and hi, Alexandra, if you can get our, words back up on the screen, that would be great. Okay, so let's move to the next recommendation, which is new 3. So let's, I guess, first just think about the introductory part of this and just see if people have comments on the direction that the recommendation itself is going before we get into the specifics of A through F. So agencies that settle large volumes of cases that do not vary considerably in terms of their factual context or the legal issues they raise should consider posting. And then we'll get into the details, but does anybody have a comment on 86 and 87, just the concept of having this kind of almost carve out. Okay. Seeing none, let's talk about a representative sample of settlement agreements. Comments? Okay. B, settlement agreements that raise particular legal issues explaining why they're especially significant. Peter. You're on mute.
There we go. I'm sorry, I wasn't quick enough. It seems to me that D is actually A. The form, and it may be the rather than a form or template commonly used. And then whether one needs A given F and the other things is not entirely clear to me, but I would start by saying the first thing they ought to disclose is their general form.
Okay, I see. Thank you for that, Peter. I see Bill's hand. I guess there's part of me that wants to just get the substance and then we can move things around depending on after we have kind of talked through whether everything needs to be there. So I think I hear Peter say that these things are linked. And so because
if you were teeing me up or not.
I was going to tee you up, Bill.
While everybody's thinking about that, I wanted to ask Elisa, right? To what extent, because I don't remember seeing it in the report, it's probably there, but I just don't remember it. To what extent agencies do any or all of these things?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so, for example, when we talked to the EEOC or other agencies that had significant confidentiality concerns, they don't post settlements on their websites, but they do post some forms of settlements on their websites to give guidance to federal agencies who are adjudicating claims with federal employees. I've seen also a summary of settlements posted on agency websites. I have also heard of database approaches. So I have seen different approaches that agencies have taken that are listed here in the recommendation. And part of the report, we thought that it was important that there be kind of some explanation kind of surrounding these things, like is this a representative sample and why, giving some context to the information that the agency is providing if they're going to provide some like subset of information.
Bill, I'm recognizing you again. It seems like you have a follow-up.
Yeah, I do. If that's the case, then isn't the introductory language here too limiting? I mean, you mentioned that EEOC doesn't generally put out their documents because it's confidentiality, but they do one of these things. So should the introductory language not relate to just because of settling large volumes of cases, but agencies that do not generally post their settlement agreements should consider posting on their websites this?
So I'm going to add at this point that I added, or I think I recommended adding point 4 here, in part in response to line 97 and 98, in part in response to the member comment that came in before, but actually what I suggested be added at 97 to 98 may actually just speak, Bill, to what you're saying, and that it would be better to move to make the language, the introductory language at lines 86 and 87 more general and almost capturing what's now in 97 and 98. I see Bill nodding. Does anybody else want to weigh in on that? I'm looking really hard. It's very, I think I see about 8 of you. I can't have the screen open and everybody else too, although there's probably some way that I can figure out how to do that actually. But anyway, Peter, I see you are kind of waving a hand, but remember everybody else, if you want me to recognize you, I am scrolling through periodically, but it's way easier if you can raise your hand, or if you can't do that, put in the chat and I really will try to find you. Peter, I do see you.
Oh, no, okay, so this seems to me again to suggest putting disclosure of forms or templates first, but then also when we get to 4, just to signal that. It should be agencies choosing not to post individual settlement agreements. Because then you don't want to excuse them from posting forms and templates.
Right. So I'm not sure, we have a kind of a bunch of different things going on here, and I'm not totally sure how to respond now to lines 86 and 87. Bill, it seemed that you thought the idea of making that introductory sentence broader
Well, I mean, I thought your suggestion of taking 4, right?
and bringing it up.
And just saying agencies choosing not to, and I would say generally, choosing not to generally post individual settlement agreements, and should consider posting on their websites, blah, 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 blah.
Okay, so let's do that. Alexandra, if you can move that part up. And then maybe let's make the moving suggestion that Peter placed, but I'll wait till you do this before suggesting that.
Choosing generally not to post.
Okay, and now let's take Peter's suggestion and move D up to the first one. Okay, and see where we are with this. I'm still interested in walking through each one individually before we completely fine tune where each one goes. So I think we've sort of talked through form or template. Have we really talked through a representative sample? Does anybody have a substantive comment on what's now B in line 91? Okay, a comment on C, what's now lines 92 and 93. Any comment on what's now D at lines 94 and 95? Peter?
Well, D is the one that's most likely to be one chosen. Well, no, never mind. I retract.
Okay. Anybody else on D? Okay, E on line 9, or Catherine?
Sorry, I'm a little late. I was just going back to, I guess, what's now C.
Sure.
I guess I would just be surprised if an agency wants to like post something that explains why the agency thinks something is especially significant.
Elisa, can you speak to what you were, like what part of the report that's capturing?
Yeah, I think what we're trying to capture here is if you're going to provide some kind of like subset of agreements, that it would be helpful to provide information about why the particular subset was chosen. Like maybe these are claims under a certain statute that are important to the agency. Maybe you know, this enforcement action, the agency has made a finding of egregiousness. So I think what we're kind of trying to capture here is providing, you know, a sample and some explanation about why that sample is significant, why it was chosen to be made available.
Catherine, do you have a response to that? Or like a further question or a suggestion about how to respond to your, what I take it to be sort of concern?
What about just something then like, I'm just sorry, like settlement agreements that raise particular legal issues, comma, noting the particular issue or something, or I guess it's just, I feel like it's the
the significant part that you're,
Significance, it's, I just
Yeah.
think an agency would be hesitant to be like, oh, this was a great win for us. We wanted to
Okay,
put it up here, or
let's-
something like that.
What
let's-
about if instead of they are, it just said explaining why those issues warrant disclosure or something like that?
Okay, thanks for that, Jeremy. Peter, I see you I think you're trying to get in on this language too. So before we settle on it, let's hear from you.
Settlement agreements that entail legal issues warranting public discussion.
Is that capture enough of, Elisa, what, that seems much weaker than the thrust of what the original language was. I almost feel like Jeremy's recommendation was a middle ground between Catherine's concern and this language. I don't know that I have a particular take on it yet, but I'm just noting that that's my reaction.
It's a discussion, not disclosure, was the word that I had in mind.
Catherine, do you have a reaction to, or Elisa, let's go with Elisa. I saw you just came off mute and I sort of did call on you a minute ago implicitly, and then I'll turn to you.
I don't know that I have the right wordsmithing. You know, I'm trying to kind of capture this idea that, you know, that they were chosen for a reason because they, you know, provide or shed light on, you know, legal issues of particular importance, but I'm not sure that that's the right language capturing that.
Catherine?
Yeah, I liked, was it Jeremy, the other suggestion better? Was it Jeremy's suggestion? Whatever the previous
So
suggestion.
explaining why those issues warrant disclosure.
And what do you, what's the difference? Catherine, why do you like this one better? What is it capturing for you?
Well, I guess in one way it's I guess yeah, I guess, are you maybe, sorry, maybe it's the same if the they had previously referred to legal issues. I guess I was thinking that they had referred to settlement agreements, but sorry. What about noting instead of explaining?
Okay, let's try that. Peter, I see you want to come in again.
Well, settlement agreements that raise particular legal issues, if I was a general counsel of an agency, I would think that you might be saying settlement agreements that are kind of chancy for the way in which they view the law. So I don't think it's raising particular legal issues, but rather that they entail or resolve or suggest.
So it's almost like
You don't want to say, hey, you don't want to be saying to the agency, disclose the settlement agreements that are the most difficult to defend.
right, which almost is the flip of what Catherine was saying before. So settle, but how about settlement agreements that entail legal issues warranting disclosure, but then because there's the second half that like, are we also suggesting that the agency explain why or note that or something with some explanatory comment or something like that? Catherine, did your hand just go up?
Fine.
Yeah, I mean, I don't love this either, but is what you were talking about like identifying or something? It didn't bother me when you said like having on the website cases involving section blah, 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 blah. Because that doesn't seem like it's pushing the agency out on a limb very much to kind of like categorize the settlement agreement. But it's more like if it has to have like a paragraph explaining why this was a novel legal issue or why it was important to the agency, that's the sort of thing I don't think an agency would want to do.
So is your concern then, especially with the noting why or explaining that language, are you comfortable with everything up until that comma in line 93? Because they sort of are two distinct thoughts we're trying to get at.
Yeah, my problem with it was just the explaining that the agency might not want to like be on record in a way that's different than the actual agreement or the briefs or whatever led to it. Explaining, but
this is not, I'm not actually suggesting this, but it's almost like we want to say, like, identifying the category of importance or noting the subsection of relevance or something like that. I think you're saying, Catherine, that you don't want us to be recommending that agencies like write a new paragraph of legal analysis, but that you're comfortable recommending a header of like the category of disclosure that this falls into. Is that capturing something?
yeah, I mean, that's what I was thinking, but I don't know that that's the right line, but I guess just
Yeah.
anything moving, I just thought explaining was too much.
Okay. Does noting also fall into that problem for you?
Noting why probably does.
Yeah, okay. Does anybody have a way to thread this needle?
I
We
think you
could-
should just drop noting why, just.
Yeah, I mean, we could just delete that part of the recommendation.
You
And so
just, and that's substantive because it means they don't have to explain anything. But they will disclose things that they think warrant disclosure. So I'm happy with that.
Okay. So settlement agreements that entail legal issues warranting disclosure. Does anybody want to push this further or want to voice approval for this language? Okay, I'm scrolling through. I see nothing, including no frantic efforts to find an unmute button. So let's maybe go to what is now E in 97, a summary of settlement trends. Peter, I see your hand.
Well, have we dealt with D?
Oh, sorry, we skipped right over that. I'm
And
wishing
that's what I was.
Yeah,
and
we did it.
given what we've done with C,
Yes,
I think D should be something like settlement agreements that for other reasons are likely to attract significant public interest or something like that, because it's the types of matters they address seems to go right back to what the legal issues are.
what actually was that trying to capture, Jeremy or Alexandra or Elisa? What was the types of matters you were trying to go for there? Do you remember?
I think I might be able to speak to that one. It's my recollection that that was going towards sort of the idea that if you have a famous sort of company regulated entity that has a big settlement that the public might be interested in, folks going to the agency website to see if they can, get a claim for some money from something like that. Something that was not directed specifically at the legal issues, but
Okay.
more the factual issues, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, if that's what you're trying to go for, then for other reasons, I think captures it just fine. Does anybody have another view or another comment on this provision? Okay, so now we can turn to the settlement trends in line 97.
Why is it or rather than and?
Can we scroll back up to the opening sentence just to understand what we're,
We want them to consider all of these.
yeah. Okay, so hearing no comments on the summary of settlement trends, so I'm always prepared for people to circle back. Let's go to the sortable or searchable database. Can we go back to the opening sentence again, Alexandra? Because I'm just trying to figure out why does this, how does this capture, why does F belong here? I don't fully understand why F belongs here, because isn't the opening sentence about kind of, we're not going to be posting? So then why would we have a database? I'm not sure that I understand this database.
The idea is that you're essentially posting metadata about each settlement agreement as opposed to the agreement itself. This is a formulation that some legislation has used.
Okay, so it's that lists information about, rather, I was misled by, I read it too quickly. Peter, you have a comment on
Well,
this?
it's just exactly that. I mean, if the issue is to avoid inviting unwished FOIA inquiries, that lists information about case type, date, case number, parties, and key terms, and not that don't ask them to list the agreements.
So I think we're missing words though, if we delete that, because is it clear what we're talking about? Information about
settlement case types, dates, case number, and
right. About settlement. Although we did have an EG there. So do we want that lists information about?
information about
Settlements?
settlements, comma,
Such as, yeah.
plural settlements, yeah.
And then probably key terms should have an and before it.
Yes.
Okay, how do people feel about this revision? Any comments on it?
If you have plurals for case types, then you probably want dates, case numbers.
Yeah. Okay, so are there any comments before we leave what's now recommendation 3? Does anybody have anything to sort of circle back to holistically now that we've done lines 86 through 100? Catherine?
Sorry, I apologize because I think I missed the very beginning. Why did we cross out the part about agencies that settle large volumes in cases that do not vary?
We were trying to go up a level of generality because there were other reasons why agencies may not decide to post individual settlement agreements that are beyond just because they may settle large. So we thought that maybe settling large volumes of cases was a subsidiary point to the larger macro point that we were going for. Peter, do you have a comment on that as well?
It's a comment on, in some sense, an order.
Can I actually ask you to hold that for just a second to see if Catherine has a follow-up question or comment with that explanation that I've just given?
I guess just when I first read the sentence, I thought it was referring to agencies that had kind of considered all the other factors and like weren't going to post agreements. I guess I just kind of it made more sense to me when it was, I guess I wouldn't read this and automatically think of cases that aren't posting them because there are so many. I had thought of it as agencies that aren't posting agreements because on balance, when they looked at all the factors we had just listed, they thought for their agency it was better not to post them.
So I think that might be right, but is there any reason why settling large volume of cases changes the substance of what the like how you would as an agency think about that? In other words, are there, right, do these factors vary if you're settling large volume of cases versus otherwise?
Maybe another way of putting it is, it seems like affirmatively what we're saying is that we realize that some agencies would recognize the value in this, but they settle thousands of agreements every year. So we're not expecting them to thousands of enforcement actions. So we're not expecting them to post like thousands and thousands of settlement agreements. Whereas I'm just not quite sure what category of agencies we think fits into this aside from that group. That would still want to post something, as opposed to an agency that's just decided, oh, we involve national security, or the agency someone was talking about before, that it for whatever reason they just categorically can't post agreements.
Bill, is your hand up to respond to this?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, Elisa told us that EEOC doesn't generally post settlement agreements because it involves personal information. And so that would be a category other than large numbers that why they don't do it. So we thought we'd just generically say, if for whatever reason you don't generally post them, then here's some other things you should consider.
If flagging is helpful, would it be helpful to say agencies choosing generally not to post individual settlement agreements to their websites, for example, because they involve sensitive interests or settle large volumes of cases? At least identifying a couple of circumstances in which agencies might not routinely post settlement agreements.
Catherine, does that respond to your?
Yeah, it does. It's helpful because I think it shows that there are agencies that might not be hostile towards posting. It may not be that they hate posting things, but just that they have these other reasons why they wouldn't. And so here's a way to still achieve the goal of, increasing transparency, et cetera.
Okay, Peter, I'll call on you in 1 sec, unless you're responding to this. I know you have something
Well,
else.
I sort of am, because what I think is missing from this recommendation at the start of it is what's in 4.
Can I actually ask you to pause on that though, just to let Alexandra catch up with her typing? I'll start back to you in 1 minute.
I'm so sorry, I lost the thread.
I know.
So
you're doing great.
Thank you so much. Jeremy, would you mind stating what you said just a few minutes prior, if you can remember it?
Why don't you just do, for example, due to, and just put in brackets sensitive interests, and the Committee on Style can do its magic for the next meeting.
Do sensitive interest / large volume, and then we have captured that too, and definitely then we're at a Committee of Style moment. Okay, so Peter, I know you want to go back now to 4 and think about bringing it up.
No, well, at that point, I want to say, should consider other means to achieve the goals of disclosure summarized in paragraph 2 and. Because that's really the important thing to do.
Okay, so great. So after the bracket large volumes. After,
should consider, that's where you put it in.
Section 4.
And then should consider posting on their websites.
So where the cursor is now, just delete it. Exactly. Although, lowercase and no period. And should consider.
Yeah.
Now, do we mean and should consider, or we don't mean for example? We mean and, because there may be still other ways to.
Right.
Okay. No, we do want that, for example, Alexandra. I don't think we're talking about deleting that. Sorry. Okay, so let's just look at this now. At the 86 through 90 language. Catherine?
I'm just wondering if the and should be including. Because aren't these other ways to achieve the goals?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure, including posting.
Exactly. That's great. Do we mean including by? I mean, that's now getting into that Committee on Style, but yeah. Okay, so let's take a last look at 86 through 91 and see where we are. Does anybody have any more substance or kind of wordsmithing that helps capture what we mean better? Okay, I'm scrolling through my faces here. I see furrowed brows, which is a good sign. Okay, I'm prepared to move on to the next recommendation pending any hey, no, wait, or a hand that comes up. Okay, hearing none, seeing none, let's move on to what's now line 103, new recommendation 4. So I'll give a minute to read it. Okay, Peter, I remember from before. you had a comment about
It's just an editing thing. We had earlier referred to this paragraph, of which I thoroughly agree, as 5, and that reference forward should now be to 4.
Okay, so we'll go back and make that change. Thanks for that catch. And on the substance of new 4,
It's terrific.
I'm looking around the Zoom room. Okay. Hearing only a terrific and seeing no other effort to get in here. I hear nothing. Let's go to new 5, 107, 108. Peter?
Could be a lot shorter. Agencies should post settlement agreements on their websites in a timely manner. No
Great.
win.
Anything else?
I agree, except everything. I mean, he says agency should, you delete the when, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
delete the win.
she's getting there. She's getting
Now,
there.
the only problem with that is we start all the others with a when. At least we did 4 with
Yeah.
when. And we do 6 with when.
This is not a series of whereas clauses.
I guess the when could be taken out of new 6 as well.
Yes, right. Yes, exactly. Same change. Agencies should post. Settlement agreements in a clear, logical, and comprehensive.
Okay, so we've moved to another recommendation. I'm just going to pause here. I'm happy to jump and nobody seems to have anything more to say on 5, but I just want to recognize that I'm happy to entertain anything else on 5 if anybody would like to raise something. And I don't see anything, so let's officially now move to 6, which is 109 to 111. And we've made this initial edit. Okay, and I think, does anybody else have any comments on this introductory sentence, or are we ready to move to the details? Okay, let's move to the details, that we can always circle back. So let's start with A. Okay, what do people think about A? Substance or phrasing? Peter?
Easily accessed from the agency's homepage, comma, site map, comma, and then I don't know whether it should be or and site index. No, not and through, just homepage, comma, site map. And then I think that should probably be an and, but it could possibly be an or.
I confess I do not know the difference between a site map and a site index. What is the difference? Is there one?
One's more obscure than the other.
Well, I generally get that an index would be like A through Z. They'd do like an A through Z index versus a map would kind of replicate the tabs on the top. I don't know that the distinction is all that important for these purposes.
Are these actual technical terms? Sitemap and site index?
They're just kind of the way I like looked at I saw like different explanations for them. I don't have like a citation to like a technical website manual. I think we could have one or the other. And people would know what they were.
I feel like I think if they're not technical terms of art, we should pick one. Bill, do you have a suggestion here?
Well, I don't know if they're technical terms, but I've always thought of them as separate, one being a visual thing and the other being a list of things that you could click on. So I think of them as different, but
Okay.
I have a more substantive point if we at least get past that.
Yeah. I mean, if you think there's some difference, I'm prepared to accept both. Going both from Elisa and Bill and visual.
Not and
yeah.
instead of or.
Yeah. Agreed. Okay, can you change that to and? Thanks, Alexandra. And so Bill, what's your substantive point?
We can't see the introductory language, but we took out the when, all right? It's now agencies should post settlement in a clear, logical, and comprehensive fashion, right? Okay, I agree with that, but then it says, for example, and then it says, for each completing proceeding provides access to a copy of the settlement agreement. We don't know that because it may be one of those settlement agreements that shouldn't be published. So there's a disconnect. I mean, it may be that this A, B, and C is just separate from clear, logical, and comprehensive fashion. Anyway, I just think there's a problem here.
So wait, I feel like there's two things there, Bill, and I am a little bit confused about them. One of them, I think, is that maintaining an enforcement webpage isn't an example of clear, logical, comprehensive, but a separate recommendation. And then the other thing is that we may not always want to be providing access to the settlement agreement. Is that right?
Correct. Those are two separate but related ideas because.
So can we just quickly see what B and C are? I'm not sure if we need a hard return or not. Alexandra, do you mind scrolling down? I see. So some of these really do seem to me to be like the search engine is kind of clear, comprehensive. I think that's what that's getting at. Peter?
So what I think where Bill is going is that in the introduction, in the introductory phrase, we should be directing this to agencies that post, that is agencies posting.
Yeah.
Agencies posting settlement agreements or information about settlement agreements on their websites.
But if all they're doing is posting information about the settlement agreements, and then we say, but they have to post the settlement agreement.
And then it should do so.
So then it's redundant. Then we don't need in A the idea of linking to the settlement agreement because we're already saying that they're posting it. Am I missing the thrust of the recommendation? Like not the recommendation, but your comment, Bill? What if we just delete provides access in line 15? Would that fix the problem?
Yeah, you'd have to take it out of A and B, I guess, and maybe I can't see C, but I thought it was in C too. Those sort filter agreements. I mean, the introductory language says agencies posting information about settlement agreements, and then A, they have to post a settlement agreement.
Right, information about settlement agreements doesn't belong there.
How about provides access to a copy of the settlement agreement or information about it?
Up in the preamble, like not preamble.
No, here.
In A.
That would do it.
Ah. And then same thing in line 118, access to a copy of the settlement agreement or.
Available or information.
Yeah, sorry, it should be after if available. Although, do we need the if available at this point? Because I'm not sure what work if available is doing.
Right.
The issue here would be that if a docket pages are often set up before the case is actually resolved. So in some case, there may be a docket page that pre-exists the settlement agreement. But I don't know that it's necessary.
But,
Oh,
but then it wouldn't be subject to our recommendation at all because there wouldn't have been a settlement agreement.
right.
So then this one goes to the, there's some other ACUS recommendation about posting agency adjudication or enforcement materials, isn't there? Do we need a cross-reference for that? Would that be helpful? I'm not familiar with that. I just know it exists, but I haven't read that recommendation. Does it say agencies should maintain docket pages for ongoing proceedings? Because if so, then I think there should be a cross-reference. I'm just not familiar enough with it to know what the cross-reference should be.
It recommends it as an option. There is an occasional ACUS preference against cross-citing other recommendations, but I don't think you can.
I didn't know that.
That is mostly received wisdom because people will say, are you trying to incorporate something by reference? Or if it requires agency readers then to go look at other recommendations to get the full picture. I think the committee can do what it thinks is best, but that objection has been raised in the past.
I don't think you need a cross-reference.
Okay. Okay, I don't, though, think that we should import necessarily a recommendation about maintaining a standalone docket page without a settlement agreement, because that goes beyond the scope of this recommendation. Doesn't it, Peter?
One thing that, maybe that's what you just said, one thing that goes beyond the scope of this recommendation is that generally describes relevant agency enforcement proceedings.
In line 114.
In line 114.
I'm actually not sure what.
I had thought that it would, I had thought at one point that it would make sense to say maintaining an enforcement web page that generally describes relevant agency enforcement proceedings, comma, easily accessed. But whether this is the recommendation in which to make that suggestion, generally describe your enforcement proceedings, is a different issue.
So just to be clear, on this other recommendation that we're not going to cross-reference because of received wisdom, does it recommend having separate agency? I mean, is this implicitly incorporating by reference, except for it's just restating it here, Jeremy?
Sort of. You could flip it and just say providing access to a copy of the settlement agreement or information about the settlement agreement on any docket page established for an enforcement proceeding. So it's neutral on whether or not an agency actually establishes docket pages. It just says, if you maintain docket pages, put settlement agreements there.
That makes sense to me because it's leading with the thrust of this recommendation.
Right.
Okay, I see Elisa nodding. Bill, do you have a comment on this particular thing we're talking about here? Or should we let Alexandra catch up?
I think so, because it may, what I was thinking was that, again, we say the posting should be clear, logical, and comprehensive, but then it doesn't say consider doing these following things. It says you shall do these things, all right? So, here, I mean, it's before this, it required them to make a docket. Now, again, this may solve that. But should A, B, and C be mandatory or things that the agency should consider doing?
So then A would be providing access to a copy of the settlement agreement or information about it on an enforcement webpage, easily accessed, ...
Through an enforcement webpage.
Sure.
I mean, rather than doing that, I wonder if back in the introductory language, if we went back to the introductory language of before A, number 6.
Okay, Alexandra, with apologies, do you mind scrolling back up there for a sec? Thank you.
So, I mean, it should present clear, logical, comprehensive fashion, period. Agencies should consider, to accomplish this, agencies should consider, blah, blah, blah. And then you could take out if providing an access, so forth.
Bill, that seems fine to me, but I don't fully understand the difference in substance that you're getting at with the new sentence.
Well, the difference is that as it's currently written, it will not be a clear, logical, and comprehensive fashion, and that's sort of mandatory. They shouldn't consider doing it in a clear, logical, and comprehensive fashion. They should do it, and the only way to do it is to do these A, B, and C. And I was thinking that it should be clear, logical, and comprehensive, and to achieve that, they should consider doing these things.
Okay, to me, the for example does the same work, but I don't object to the, but before we scroll back down, Alexander, so Bill, are you suggesting that in line 111, before agencies should consider, we need the preliminary phrase to accomplish this or not?
I think with it would be, I don't think you need it, but it might be helpful. I mean, it just ties the two together, say, to accomplish this or something, but it's not a very nice way of saying it either, but.
Can we leave that to committee of style? I don't love
Okay.
this. Could you
Okay,
make a
sounds
note of
good.
that? Yeah. Okay, so now let's go back down to
Then you can take out the if in A. And take out the if in B.
okay, I think we still have extra language hanging around in A though. So let's just stick with A and then work through B and C first. So back to A before working on parallelism or different substance or anything like that. Just let's look at A lines 112 through 117. I think there's some extra wordage floating around.
I suggest a period after the word index. Again, I'm not sure that we want to say to agencies that they have to generally describe their enforcement proceedings, or that this is the recommendation in which to do so. And the rest of the sentence repeats what we've moved to the beginning of the recommendation.
So Peter, are you also, so if Alexander, let's try to do that. So at the end of line 114 after index, let's put a period. And Peter, I was just going to make sure that you were suggesting deleting that last bit that Alexander just deleted in lines 1
Yes, because it's now at the top.
because it's a different, okay, right. Bill, is your hand back up or is this still up from
No,
before?
It's, sorry.
Okay. Okay, so does anybody have any other comments on A, recommendation A only, providing access to a copy of the settlement agreement or information about it through an enforcement web page, easily accessed from the agency's homepage, site map, or site index? Peter, was that your hand going back up again?
No, I'm anticipating B.
Okay. Okay. I'm looking to just see if anybody else has anything on A before we get to B. Scrolling, looking, waiting, hearing nothing. Let's go to B. But Peter, before I call on you, just like I'm going to give everybody a minute to just read the couple of lines. And Bill, I see you too, but I just want to have everybody read the lines. Okay. I think we're now, there's got extra words now here that aren't fully making sense. So Peter, did you want to start?
Well, I don't know how you're going to work the cross-reference, but I had thought that the idea here was that if the agency maintains docket pages, and
Any docket page,
that's not there.
through any docket page, the agency,
Well,
I would say it's a different issue, which is the introductory language is providing access to copy of the settlement agreement information about it. We've already said that in A. Exact same language.
right.
So, I mean, this B's got to be a different idea, that which is
okay,
Using any docket page, using any docket pages the agency maintains.
okay, Peter and Bill, thanks for that. I see Elisa's hand up, who may be ready to tell us what the thrust of B is getting at. So before we do any more editing on B, let's just hear from Elisa.
Right. I just wanted to add here that like docket page was kind of a way of thinking about how to link settlements to other supplementary information. And so some agencies do that through a docket page, and they have, you know, their complaint, and they have other adjudicative documents. Others don't do that. And what would be helpful is to have like just a grouping, like if you're going to have a settlement agreement, have links to the press release or have a link to related, you know, adjudication materials. And some agencies may choose to do that through a docket page, but I think it's also helpful for agencies that don't do docketing just to kind of group information about a settlement on a page that is separate from kind of the general enforcement website page. That's
Okay.
kind of the general thrust of the recommendation, not necessarily requiring every agency to maintain a docket page, but to group information about the settlement together.
So I wonder, would we capture that if we delete at the beginning of line 119, if we delete that provides? So it just says providing access to a copy of the settlement agreement or information about it, perhaps on any docket page for the agency enforcement proceeding.
no.
No,
No, okay, so I'm missing it. Okay, vigorous no's from Bill and Peter. Bill, go. Why don't we turn to you?
Go back to the original formulation of starting the sentence with maintaining a docket page.
But wait, I thought we decided we weren't going to do that because that's not this recommendation.
That
The
is
idea that if there is already a docket page,
No.
we just want to make sure the settlement agreement is linked to all that material. No, Bill, Peter, I'll call on you in a sec, but Bill.
that we haven't addressed docket pages yet in this recommendation, all right? So A says, give a copy of the settlement agreement through various means, all right? Then we say, you know, maintaining a docket page. That's a different idea, all right? And now they don't have to do it because this is just something they're supposed to consider because of our introductory language. But I think the original language of maintaining a docket page for each agency enforcement proceeding that provides access to a copy of the settlement agreement or something or other, along with any associated materials. I think that's fine.
Okay, I see where you're going with that. Peter?
so what I heard and agree with is that the real thrust here is providing access to any associated materials, for example, and after the close of the parenthesis, comma, such as on a docket page the agency maintains.
Okay, so that's a different way of resolving the same issue. So
And it's a way of resolving the issue that doesn't say you should
Yeah,
be
maintain.
making docket pages.
great. Okay, so the way to do that then would be, no, actually, Alexandra, I think we wanted that. So this way would be providing access to a copy of the settlement agreement or information.
You don't need that because that's an A, as has been pointed out, providing access to any associated materials. And then after the close of the parenthesis, comma, as by use of a docket page.
Erica?
in A, we have or information about it. Does that, are we repeating ourselves a little bit or no? No? Okay. I answered my own question no, because Peter was shaking his head no.
Can we go back to just the introductory material on the previous page, Alexandra? I forgot how we have this. So agencies posting settlement agreements. To accomplish this, agencies should consider. Okay. Okay, so we don't need to repeat the settlement agreements.
Right.
I had lost the thread of this introductory sentence in lines 109 to 111. So now I understand the docket information. Okay, can we go back to C? Sorry, to B. How, Erica, did you have any other comment on B?
No, I think I'm good. I think it helped to go back to look at the intro.
Okay. Does anybody else have a comment on, have any comment on B before we turn to C? I'm going to scroll through to see if I'm missing hands. I see nothing. Okay, Erica, your hand is still up. Is this from the previous question? Okay, great. So let's talk about C. Let me give a minute to just read it. Okay, any comments on C? I see a thumbs up from Bill. Any other voices? Okay, I think I saw a thumbs up from Peter, although I was scrolling and I just caught the tail end of the thumb coming down. Can we just go back to the lines? I'm sorry to do this one more time. But the introductory sentences, yeah, and then sort of just look at the whole thing holistically. Agencies posting settlement agreements or information about settlement agreements. Okay, so we have then these three separate ideas: providing access through the enforcement webpage, linking, and searching. Peter?
Well, given what A, B, and C are about in the introductory sentence, could you show it again? They should present them in a clear, logical, comma, readily accessible, comma, and comprehensive fashion.
Great. Okay, any other comments on recommendation 6 or any part of it? That is real progress. So my instinct now, although I will turn to my ACUS leaders here, is that we should not start tackling the preamble, or is that a wrong instinct?
I think that's a very good instinct.
Okay, all right. I think we have done a lot of work today. So maybe if you can take us out of the share screen, Alexandra, just so we can see each other more fully again. I think, let me go back. I have more that I need to say to close us out. So let me just go back and open up to make sure that I'm saying what we need to say. Oh, we need to see if there's comments by public attendees. I'm glad I double checked. Does anybody who has not yet spoken, I'm going to assume unanimous consent here unless I hear objections. I hear no objections. Does anybody who is not a member who falls into this category who has not yet spoken want to speak, at which point we can easily put the recommendation back up on the screen if you would like to. Okay, I am hearing and seeing no efforts at same. Bill, I saw you come off.
Silence is golden.
Silence is golden. Okay, all right. So I'm going to assume we're okay then for that. And I'm going to say thank you to everybody for this very productive meeting of hard work and lots of accomplishment. Thank you to Alexandra for that amazing speedy typing, capturing everything. Thank you to Elisa for the great report and for sort of starting us off here. Our next meeting is on Friday, October 28th from 1 to 4 p.m. Eastern, same time, same place. And we will recirculate. Peter, is this you want to be recognized, or is this a?
No, I'm just wondering whether, and Sean can answer this, whether it would be appropriate or whether you need any kind of vote to approve in general what we've done.
So I think we have to go back to the preamble, and we don't vote until, Sean, I don't mean to step on your toes. This is probably a question for you.
Actually, it's probably a question for Jeremy as committee practice, but I think the final vote is usually on adoption of the recommendation after the preamble has been tweaked.
My other instinct is that we may end up, there may be some other comments on the revised recommendation when we have more folks in the room on the second time. And the Committee on Style will try to work its magic, and there may be revisions to the Committee on Style's magic. So I think we'll wait on the vote until then. So 2 weeks from today, same time, same place, we will recirculate with said magic. And it's great to work with you all. So happy to be chairing this committee, so happy to be on this project, and thank you to everybody. And we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.